Namaste all of you. On March 16, 2020, Shri Narendra Modi ji announced a lockdown throughout the country. Overnight, the schools had to be shut and all the plans envisioned by the schools be dropped. In a report by the World Economic Forum, by the end of March 2020, there were about 1.2 billion students who were affected by this pandemic and their education was disrupted, out of which 26% of students were from India alone. This is a very startling number. Fearing further disruption in education, schools had to now look out for alternate solutions as to how they could reach the students. Technology was something that was entwined in our lives, and even during the physical functioning of the schools, educational apps were being used, even before COVID. Use of educational apps to augment learning was not something that schools were not aware of. But remote learning was a concept that not many schools were prepared for nor were aware of. So now the question was, the facts were right in front of us. The COVID scare was intensifying and the lockdown had to be extended. Schools now had to rise to the occasion to reach out to the students. What was the solution in front of them? It was only virtual mode. But having said this, were the schools having enough resources, enough infrastructure to take this virtual learning mode on trigger? This was a question that we had to answer. Were the teachers trained enough? The infrastructure in place? So there were a lot of questions moving out throughout the globe. Despite all the fears and challenges, the schools embraced this situation and rose to the occasion so beautifully. All the teachers across the globe came together virtually to help out through lots of webinars and conferences to discuss new ideas and methods and to discuss about the challenges that arised out of the implementation and the solutions that can be taken out to the students. So the schools had to deploy a lot of resources, technical expertise in place to set up these systems so that virtual learning could reach students back at home. But the question was, were the teachers ready for this kind of a transition? Were the schools ready for this kind of a transition? Were the parents, the students and the stakeholders involved ready for this kind of a transition? But what was the other alternative if not for virtual learning? So teachers were trained, lot of time and energy was invested into getting onto the online mode, adapting to this new situation. Initially, though it was difficult for the teachers to adapt, but they understood the requirements of the learners and rose to the occasion. Educators from across the globe met virtually and expert resources were available immediately in the pandemic time because connecting virtually was easy and convenient. So it was really beautiful to see how these educators from across the globe came together to work towards this one common goal of sustaining learning. Now with the systems in place, the schools ready for this kind of a transition and the teachers prepared, were the students ready to accept this change? Now that was the question. Students of the 21st century are tech savvy. They love everything to do about technology. But were they ready for online mode? This was a question mark. It was initially easy for students to come to digital learning because they were excited about the digital experience. Now the question raised was whether the learning was engaging and interesting for the child. If technology was used only to replace a conventional class with a video lecture, this did not reap benefits and the learning suffered in such kind of schools. But where schools had invested time and energy in training their teachers to make learning more creative, more engaging and more interesting and giving that personalized experience for the child, the attendance in these kind of schools improved over a period of time and the retention of the students also improved. There were many students who enrolled for online classes over the pandemic. Now that the students were into the online mode of learning, the question was about the parents. The parents were stuck and were really they didn't have any idea as to how the learning would continue for their students, for their children, because the schools were not to reopen in the near future. But in fact, they were surprised and very happy to see how schools embraced the situation and immediately adapted to this transition and brought out the new way of learning and reached out to the students. Parents enrolled their students in the online classes, and few of them who did not, for the fears of misusing internet, social media, and for the effects on their physical health due to prolonged exposure to digital devices, homeschooled them. But not everybody had the resources and the expertise to homeschool their students. If we look at the Indian context, more than 70% of the students are actually enrolled into government schools. Those are the public schools. The state and the central governments took up many initiatives to cope with the learning loss during the pandemic. They had launched programs like Diksha, an e-learning platform mode where e-content was available for grades 1 to 12. For the remotest of places where there was no internet connectivity, 32 DTH channels were launched to broadcast recorded sessions and a separate channel for differently abled students over the television. But even where television was not available, it was very difficult to reach out to the students. In fact, they made use of a program called Shikshavani, where audio content lessons were broadcasted over radio and podcasting. Despite all these efforts taken by the government, it was impossible to reach out to few students in the remotest of areas. In a 2019 government survey, it is said that around 24% of the households only have access to proper internet and 4% from the rural areas. So with this understood, due to the lack of internet connectivity and the lack of good digital infrastructure, learning suffered in these areas. Now there was a fear of a huge digital divide. Now this digital divide deepened and there was this divide between the rich and the poor and the developed and the underdeveloped countries. So if this online education has to continue in the future, governments have to invest a lot of time and money into bringing up good infrastructure, good digital infrastructure and improving internet and providing internet to the remotest areas. Enrollment in government schools is close to 70%. Now that the remote learning was in place, there was a serious concern that was popping out. Parents started reporting cases of aggression, of depression coming out of loneliness, because the students were confined to their homes for a longer period of time and they had very less physical activity and boredom was set in. So they had to reach out to the schools, and schools employed professional expertise to provide individual and group counseling sessions for the students. In fact, attempts were also made by a few schools to arrange some form of physical activity and meditation classes to help students come out of their loneliness. So this was a major concern, and the government of India had launched a program called Manodarpan, which is a psychosocial support for the mental health and well-being of the students during the COVID pandemic. Technology, if used in a wise way, can reap us a lot of benefits. But if technology is used only to replace a conventional classroom with a video lecture, the learning will suffer. So it gets its due credit only if learning can be made more engaging, more creative, and customized to the learner. Now for Paramita, this pandemic has been a blessing in disguise. For us, it was an opportunity to train our teachers, to set lot of systems in place, to talk to our parents and students and talk about the work that we have done and how schools of such resilience can turn every challenge into an opportunity. Whether pandemic or no pandemic, schools have to be prepared to embrace new ideas and methods where schools will be transformed into learning spaces where children are able to discover their true potential. If now that a new normal in education has been defined, the new education model where learning will happen with technology blended, are we all prepared for this kind of an education in future? If governments have to continue this and take it to the remotest of the places, there is a huge investment that needs to be happened. So this pandemic was like a time machine that took us, traveled through 10 years down the line. For us, we feel more empowered, the teachers are empowered, so with better skilled teachers in place and with improved resources, we collect the profound experiences of the pandemic era and we step into the post-pandemic era with a lot of confidence and conviction that learning can be personalized, can be made creative, can be made interesting and engaging for the child. So let's all work towards this new normal in education. Thank you very much.